This seminar is giving us the opportunity to bring together some very smart people who are interested in similar questions about transfer, about the ability to move from one context to the other as a writer and communicator. And because of that sort of collective energy, I think we're going to be able to do some really good things, both collectively and individually. The projects are pretty wide-ranging, but they're really united in this common interest in the sort of meta question of what happens when people move across contexts. What are they bringing with them?
Well, how would I define transfer? I think that's one of the challenges of the whole seminar is bringing people together to answer that question. My initial understanding of the term is thinking about what students bring with them that informs their actions in the class and what students carry out to future settings, whether it's informal context, whether it's future classes, whether it's a future non-academic settings. But I think that has a lot of assumptions in that understanding of transfer, and I don't think it's a very rich definition.
Because my own understanding had been what I've just said, that I thought it was whatever the students had transferred from high school that they could apply in university and then build on that. But from the discussion that went on, it appeared that there is a difficulty pulling apart transition from transfer, because in our question, one of our questions was we were going to administer a survey which would try to establish what the students' experiences and dispositions were being brought into university.
Just whatever you can say. Okay. Transfer is the ability, the capacity to move from one situation to another and use, adapt, apply knowledge, skills, and beliefs from another situation.
Because of my background in teaching and learning, I was looking to see where transfer would overlap with, let's say, taxonomies of learning. So from that discussion, my working definition would be the application of learning from one place to another. And I was thinking about it yesterday. I thought, although I don't teach motor skills or anything, I have experience in that area. And in motor skills, it seems quite clear. So if you can hit an overarm in badminton, you might be well able to throw the javelin. So they're very different, but the same sorts of things are used. So if you can do the overarm in badminton, you can bring that with you to learning the javelin. So it's the information that you can bring from one area to the next to kind of springboard you into where you want to be.
Well, what I started thinking about yesterday is the classic definition of transfer is something learned in one place, time, location, and then applied in another place, time, location. And that's the most sort of straightforward, I think, definition. But there are also all of these elements that are involved in the transfer situation. So the learner, the instructional context, the instructional task, the transfer context, the transfer task. And so I started thinking about it almost like a graph where you have the thing learned, the thing applied, but then you have vertically these different elements. So you can sort of plot out what element is affecting the transfer at what point, or how are they all playing out together. So it makes it a little bit more complex.
And I think to add to Jen's definition, the traditional definition being you take something from one place to another, but that only works for measurement and research purposes. And so, as researchers, we have to say, okay, I'm going to look at this one context and I'm going to look at how this applies in this other context. And we have to put sort of a beginning and an end. But the concept as a learning concept is much more convoluted and complex. It's not just that learners begin at one place with nothing before and end at one place with nothing after. And these two places are not all the places that learners are being. And so we start to see this sort of river that weaves in and out that adds much more layers of complexity to the actual learning of transfer versus the study of it.
Sure. I think there are several key concepts, and I think that they have shown up in the literature, which is what the Four Seasons Research Initiative was about. What does the literature have to say? So there's a general literature that comes out of educational psychology largely, represented by a book like How People Learn. And terms there that show up are things like prior knowledge, and metacognition and explicitness. Well, that might be one set. More specifically relative to composition, we might look at work like Anne Beaufort's. I think it's pretty well known that Beaufort's model has 5 knowledge domains to it, and so knowledge would be even a key term. But those knowledge domains, if I recall correctly, composing process knowledge, genre knowledge, rhetorical knowledge, content knowledge, and I'm missing something else. Discourse community knowledge, right? And so that's interesting. Another term, and I think this is a point of tension, actually, in my own view, is awareness. So is it, for instance, is it genre awareness? Is it rhetorical awareness? Or is it really knowledge? So I think some of the key terms are key terms that have a heuristic value to them, is the way I would put it. It's not the case that people have necessarily signed off on them. Bridging and hugging, which is a mechanism that allows people to associate two texts. I think adaptation is another key term, because even here at this institute, there's something on the part of some anyway, a kind of dissatisfaction with the term transfer itself, in that it can be interpreted as being a kind of mechanical application, not mindful, the opposite of mindfulness, which is another key term. So the notion of abstraction and intentionality is very much a part of this as well, and I think I've alluded to the idea of context. And I'll say that another key term here that we haven't actually spent a lot of time on, but that I think is fundamental, is actually composing. What do we actually mean by composing? Do we mean basically words on a page, or do we mean something that's fully multimedia? So, I mean, the really great thing about this, then, is that there's so much good work to do, and it's very exciting to be part of it. Become interested with it.
My experience with transfer research and interest in it really grew out of reading the fields literature and feeling like we were talking around it and starting to grapple with it, but really not digging our heels in and figuring out what's really happening. We've had a lot of assumptions that things do transfer, but very few folks have really jumped in and explored what does transfer, if it transfers. And I think that there's really an opportune moment for us as a field to stop, figure out this underlying assumption, if it really holds, and move forward collectively to explore what really moves from setting to setting, moves with students into our courses and out of our courses.
My experience with transfer research has basically taken 3 forms. I started using portfolios in 1979, and they do provide a pretty interesting picture of how students are using what they've learned in different contexts, just because they welcome a set of texts. But it's also the case that in their reflective text, students have been pretty explicit about how what they've done in this context relates especially to what they've done before, so an interest in prior knowledge. But the other thing is that I have historically asked students to include a text from another context. And so I'm able to see through the inclusion of that text in their commentary how what they're using in our class is either working or not working. So inadvertently, I think my work with portfolios fostered in me an interest in transfer. So that would be point one. Second, I was able to use some of that work in the book I did, Reflection in the Running Classroom, which is very interested in how students make knowledge. So the idea, I think, behind transfer is that students are making knowledge. And repurposing that knowledge, remixing that knowledge, and so forth. So there's that. And I'd say more recently, my work on transfer was informed by so this is the third point, was informed by a 4Cs research initiative where, or in which I did a synthetic study of what had been done on transfer before. And started developing a theory of transfer.
Looking at what are threshold concepts, particular kinds of concepts in first-year writing classes or in composition, and then whether developing practice with those concepts will foster student success in writing in classes beyond first-year writing. So I'm going to flip that around again for a second, too. There's some work that's been done by people who are here and elsewhere, suggesting that learning bottlenecks in classes beyond first-year writing are tied to students' inability to master threshold concepts, or teachers' inability to help students master threshold concepts. So I'm interested in looking at whether work that explicitly addresses threshold concepts in first-year writing can then help students move through those learning bottlenecks in other courses. I hope it's both more developed, more thoroughly conceptualized and theorized in a more consistent way. Not that it's not consistent now, but I think we're starting to build a sort of baseline of knowledge and theory. And I hope that there are more studies addressing questions that stretch across disciplines and contexts, very much like what we're doing here.
Where I'd like to see transfer in about 5 years is looking at larger scale studies. That's why I'm really glad that we're talking about multi-institutional studies. I've seen some really nice single institutional, smaller scale work. And to be able to start, I think realistically we have to do that, single scale, smaller scale, or single institution, smaller scale work. But if we can start to combine our efforts and then begin to draw bigger pictures, see patterns across multiple institutions with larger sets of students, then that's where I'd like to see it go. I think we've done some exploratory stuff. It's time to start looking bigger and seeing whether the patterns are more than just a local manifestation.
Well, I hope in terms of the research that we're engaged in, that we have a better understanding of the nature and processes involved in transfer. I think one of the key questions is if we know that transfer is never easy, particularly when there's distance between the contexts, and in terms of familiarity or unfamiliarity, we need to understand what helps writers to move more quickly into those new contexts and cope with unfamiliar kinds of genres. And I think those questions can help us pedagogically in particular. I don't think we have a really good handle yet on what we should be teaching in order to facilitate transfer smoothly. I think we've talked a lot here in this seminar about what we can do to help students to develop a kind of rhetorical awareness and contextual awareness, particularly through new kinds of pedagogy such as writing about writing courses. I think we need to explore those more fully and see to what extent they're effective. And that's part of what's going on here. It's part of what people are studying.